This is a class on the minor prophets, and we are in Habakkuk this morning. A very fascinating read, but it's even more fun to say. Habakkuk. Habakkuk. Who's got a name with 3 K's in it but Habakkuk? At any rate, I hope everybody's been enjoying this class as much as I have, because I have really been enjoying it. And you make it a great deal of my enjoyment when we come in and you're so attentive and you're making comments and you're thinking about what's in the text. I really appreciate that very much. So let's get into it. I need some readers this morning. I need 3 readers. We're just going to read the first chapter. We won't read the whole portion of Habakkuk. It's a whole 3 chapters, but we'll read the first chapter just to give us a flavor. And so I need 3 readers. But before I get the readers, as the text is read, look for the questions and see if you can count the questions and mark the questions, and we'll talk about some of those questions. So first reader for verses 1 through 4. 1 through 4. If you want the short bit, this is it. 1 through 4. Steve's got the short bit. Kurt, I'll give you 5 through 11 and then 12 to 17. Okay, Rich, you got 12 to 17. Let's read the first chapter of Habakkuk together. Yes, ready.
The oracle that Habakkuk the prophet saw. O Lord, how long shall I cry for help, and will you not hear? Or cry to you, violence, and you will not save? Why do you make me see iniquity, and why do you idly look at the wrong? Destruction and violence are before me. Strife and contention are wild. So the law is paralyzed, and justice never goes. Justice never goes away. 4. For the wicked surround the righteous, so justice goes forth for perverse.
Oh, ye among the nations, look, and wonder marvelously, for I am working the work of your days, which you will not believe, though it be told you. Lo, I raise up the Chaldeans, consider a heathen nation, march to the bread of the earth, possess dwelling places that are not theirs. They are terrible and dreadful, dreadful and tragedy conceive of themselves. Their forces also are swifter than leopards, and more fierce than the evil bull. And their horsemen spread proudly on, yea, their horsemen come from far. And flies an eagle that hasteth to devour. They come all of them for violence. Set their faces to the forward, and they gather captives at the same. Yea, he scoffeth at kings, and princes are a derision unto him. He derideth every stronghold, for he heaveth up dust, and taketh it. He shall sweep by as a wind, and shall pass over, and be guilty, even he who is mighty as God.
O Lord my God, my Holy One, you are eternal. Surely you do not plan to wipe us out. O Lord, our rock, you have sent these Babylonians to correct us, to punish us for our many sins. But you are pure and cannot stand the sight of evil. Will you wink at their treachery? Should you be silent while the wicked swallow up people more righteous than they? Are we only fish to be caught and killed? Are we only sea creatures that have no leader? Must we be strung up? Must we be strung up on their hooks and caught in their nets while they rejoice and celebrate? Then they will worship their nets and burn incense in front of them. These nets are the gods who have made us rich, they will claim. Will you let them get away with this forever? Will they succeed forever in their heartless conquests?
Questions. Did you see any questions? How many did you count? What was the nature of the questions? That to me is the point. What are these questions about?
Whether God is really on the word or not.
All right. Do you see what's happening down here? How does it start? The oracle which Habakkuk the prophet saw. So he's seen something. and he's reporting on what he has seen, but it doesn't start with a report of what he's seen. What does it start with immediately after that statement? It starts with his questions, because the question is based on what he has seen. And what has he seen, by the way? What? Violence. He's seen violence. Now, what violence has he seen? I mean, there's one violence starting in verse 5. What's that violence relating to? Well, especially when you get to verse 6. It starts in verse 5, but then you get to verse 6. What's God doing? He's raising up the Babylonians or the Chaldeans. Why is he raising up the Babylonians? Why is he bringing the Chaldeans? Because of violence. But whose violence? The violence of the Israelites. God's own people are abusing themselves among themselves. We'll get to that in chapter 2, but that's what's going on. That's what Habakkuk is seeing, and that's, to me, what he's asking about in verse 2. How long will I call for help and you don't do anything? Now, is that about the Chaldeans? He didn't say specifically, but I rather think he's asking about what he's seeing among his own people. Abusing themselves, cheating themselves, making merchandise of one another. And that's the reason God is bringing the count. God doesn't bring judgment for nothing. He just doesn't sit up in heaven. Oh, what am I going to do today? Oh, I think I'll bring judgment on a nation. Doesn't work that way. Do you get up in the morning and say, I think I'll spank my kids today, just for fun? Yeah. What reason can I find against them? Now, Steve, he's a weirdo. He does that, but that's... You had your hand up, brother.
You know, these questions that Habakkuk is asking goes back to what Elijah said in his prophecy. You know, as you read through Elijah, you see that the Israelites had become more promiscuous and evil than the surrounding countries. I mean, that's what really, he was just overwhelmed with his people being so arrogant and the iniquity they caused.
Right.
So I'm assuming that maybe Habakkuk is seeing that kind of thing.
Is that something that's unusual to see that kind of thing in humanity? Or is it a constant? It should be unusual, but it's not. It's not. That's the problem. And every time we read one of these prophets, we see the same kind of thing. We see God calling out his own people. He's not necessarily, sometimes he calls out the nations, but those are the nations. But when he's calling out his own people and saying, I'm calling you out to the extent that I'm bringing one of the nations on you, one of the worst nations, I'm bringing to your doorstep to inherit your house for a while, and it's because of your evil, your violence against one another. If you're going to do this to each other, why don't I have some foreign nation come and do it to all of you and get you straightened out? Just turn you over to them for a while. This is one of the scariest concepts among the prophets, and it's a very consistent concept that God will bring this kind of a judgment on his own people, people that he loves, because of their sin. And he doesn't necessarily call it sin or iniquity. He calls it violence. And when someone sins against us, that's what we consider it. You've been violated. Exactly. Dayton?
I think it's important, Marty, to note here, we often say that if something's mentioned in the Bible once, it's important. But if it's mentioned 3 or 4 times, we better really take notice.
Right.
And here is a prophet of God, obviously has some spiritual qualities in him, or he wouldn't be who he is. Complaining to God a little bit about what is going on and what doesn't. We want to help God sometimes. Now, the reason I'm mentioning and 2 again. And then in 44 and 23 and 24, there's a saying, wake up, Lord, why do you sleep? Rouse yourself. Do not reject us forever. And I have, I believe, 7 other listings of human complaints toward God. I'm saying that for 2 reasons. One, if it happens to us sometime that we wonder about God, we may realize that we haven't lost all of our spiritual marbles.
Right.
And then the other thing is that we often really need to be patient and let Him have His way on His own schedule.
Absolutely.
Amen.
Now, with these passages, who's the most famous one who ever said anything like that? I heard some murmurings out there. What did Jesus say on the cross? What did He quote on the cross? Dayton mentioned the text, Psalm 22. My God, why have you forsaken me? Now, he didn't just say that, but he quoted the 22nd Psalm. Who wrote the 22nd Psalm? David, a man just like us. This is such a concurrent theme in history when people who put their trust in God are wondering, where are you, Lord? And if you or I are in the midst of a difficult circumstance, that's our question. I remember reading a title to a book years ago. I think I'm quoting it accurately. If God loves me, why can't I get my locker open? Yeah, see, you're laughing because on one hand you think, well, that's just so relatable. But even though it's on the terms of a young person in school, that's a crisis situation when you're in school and you're scared to death of everybody looking at you and you're so stupid you can't even get your locker open. Nobody wants to be around you because you're a goofball. You can't even get your locker. See, everything hinges around one small thing like that. But here's Habakkuk, and he's seeing in this vision, this view that God has given him, the Chaldeans are coming. Oh no, how can you do this, Lord? Well, by the way, forget about the Chaldeans. How can you look at what my own people are doing to themselves and not do anything about this? And what's God saying? I am. How many times in this class have we heard the phrase, don't make me come down there? But that's what we know is coming. God is coming down, but He does it in His own time and in His own way. How many of us sitting here this morning have wondered the same thing about our own nation? Lord, how can you look upon what's happening in our nation and not do something about it? And yes, God's answer right now is, I am. I'm working on it. I'm encouraged so many times when I see people trying to do what's right. And you see that a lot if you look for it. That one of the problems I think we have in our culture is we're so glued to the TV, and so whoever's got control of the TV and the news, they influence to a great deal what we see. I think there's a lot more good in the world than what we see, but it's still there. The evil is there. And if we report on the evil all the time, that's, you think about that. If your attention is constantly on the negative, well, you might develop a negative view. But if you take the time to look away from what's negative and look at what's positive, you go, oh, that's okay. And I always remember, I know I've mentioned this to you several times, I remember the lines at Chick-fil-A's. When Chick-fil-A was called into question, not because somebody said something bad about gays, but because somebody simply said, we support traditional marriage, the idea of one man and one woman. And boy, everything just went crazy. And then, well, you can't do that. And the whole country seemed like, to me, turned out to say, yes, we can. We're going to line up for chicken sandwiches, and we're not even hungry. You remember that, don't you? It happened. It happened. And I look at that, I go, wow, yeah. We're not all together going down the tubes just yet. There are people who want to stand up for what's right and do the right thing. Now, they might not see everything just like we do, but there's a lot of good in the country. But my concern is that we tend to gravitate downwards. And unless there is a concerted effort, unless there is salt, unless there is light, unless there are cities set on hills throughout the country to hold up the gospel of Jesus Christ, and by holding up the gospel, I mean holding up Jesus Christ and Him crucified. That's what Jesus said. If I be lifted up, I will draw all men to me. So this is the same situation we've got with Habakkuk. All this evil that he's seeing, and God's punishing the evil. He's coming to take care of it. But that's going to be hard. That makes for difficult times. Look at verse 11, however. 5 through 11 is talking about the Chaldeans coming and how evil and wicked the Chaldeans are. But this is God telling us in verse 11, they're going to be held guilty. They whose strength is their God. Who's going to be held guilty? Well, the Chaldeans. Well, wait a minute. Didn't God call on the Chaldeans to come and bring judgment on Judah? But if we read what other prophets have said, if the Chaldeans had said to themselves, you know what, God wants us to bring judgment on Judah. Let's go and take care of that for God. But that wasn't their attitude. Their attitude was anything but godly. And God allowed that godliness to work to accomplish His will, but then He called into judgment those who brought the judgment. You see any contradiction in that? They had a choice. Right. Or we'll go and we'll punish them justly. But if you read about what the Chaldeans did to their captives, they would inflict pain just for fun. And this kind of thing happens throughout human history, and it's part of our history as a nation, where some folks look upon other human beings as less than human and thereby justify themselves in mistreating and abusing them. Now, I don't think it's right that we as a nation take on the entire burden of guilt for this. It's part of our history. But and I'm not trying to get political, but all the while that there were people inflicting abuse and pain and violence, there were others. I just hope it wasn't something that I said or did. No. Habakkuk's a who, didn't he? You did what? Lord started it. Well, it says right here, judgment's coming then, because he does. You know, that you think if you meet somebody with a sense of humor, you think, what's wrong with those people? Anybody that doesn't have a sense of humor. Aren't you glad for that? If God didn't have a sense of humor, He wouldn't have made monkeys, because you just can't hardly look at a monkey. And that, I'm not trying to impress anybody with the idea of anything about you girls either, but what were we talking about? It's all right. It's all right. Chuck, try to rein her in a little, will you? Yeah. That's oh, judgment's coming. If anybody ever asks about whether or not our Bible classes are fun, you just tell them. Yeah. Let's see. I got some notes here, and I hardly ever look at them, and that's my big mistake. I don't know why I bother to make notes. Oh, here we are. I want you to contrast what he says about justice in verse 4, chapter 1, verse 4, and verse 7. Verse 4 of chapter 1, he says, "Therefore the law is ignored, justice is never upheld, for the wicked surround the righteous, therefore justice comes out perverted." Who's he talking about there, by the way? He's talking about God's people. Talking about Israelites, Judeans. This is what the situation is among them. So look down at verse 7. Who's he talking about in verse 7? Talking about the Chaldeans, the Babylonians, these fierce, angry, hateful, ugly, spiteful, mean warriors who were coming down from the north. They are dreaded and feared. Their justice and authority originate with themselves. That is a scary statement. When somebody who's in power and has total power has no regard for real justice, but what they consider justice originates within themselves, then anything goes. Anything goes. And that's what happened when the Chaldeans descended on Jerusalem. Now keep in mind, Habakkuk prophesied prior to the Chaldeans coming on Jerusalem. So he's seeing this, and he knows of this impending judgment coming from God, but he doesn't know exactly when. So when we start in chapter 2, this is what we read. I'll stand on my guard post, station myself on the rampart. What's a rampart? It's up on the high wall. It's a part of where you would go up and you would look and you would watch for anything to come. I'll keep watch to see what he will speak to me and how I may reply when I am reproved. See what he says there? He's expecting to be reproved. When God reproves me, I'm going to watch to see what God's going to do, and then when he speaks and I'm reproved, I'm going to find out what that's all about. The Lord answered me, and he said, record the vision. Inscribe it on tablets. Why would you inscribe it in tablets? This isn't some passing thing. This is serious. This needs to be written in stone. This needs to be put down so that the one who reads it may do what? Get out of town, get out of Dodge, flee, run. For the vision is yet for the appointed time. It hastens toward the goal, and it will not fail. Though it tarries, wait for it, for it will certainly come. It will not delay. Now, is there a contradiction when it says, though it tarries, wait for it, it will not delay? What does he mean by that? What is the judgment tarrying for? It's on schedule. It's waiting for the appointed time. When the appointed time comes, there will be no delay. When the appointed time comes and God says to the Chaldeans, march, they will march. And they're going to be on Jerusalem's doorstep and in Jerusalem's most intimate places, because that's what they do. It will certainly come. It will not delay. Now look at verse 4. And if you mark in your Bible, you can circle verse 4 with a big, bright colored pen. Behold, as for the proud one, his soul is not right within him. But the righteous will do what? Live by his faith. What does Paul say about faith when he writes to the church at Corinth? He says, we do not walk by sight. It's not what we see, but it's what we know to be true because God has told us or God has revealed us. That's faith. You don't see it, but God said it, so since God said it, we believe it. You believe in heaven? You better believe it. We believe in heaven. That's why we're here. We're also here because we believe in hell. We believe in both. We've not seen either, but we believe in them. We're confident that they both exist. We believe in God. We believe in his justice and his mercy. We believe in his salvation through Jesus Christ. We believe in all these things, though there's so much we've not seen. What did Jesus say to Thomas when Thomas touched his wounds and he said, "My Lord and my God"? And Jesus said to Thomas, "Blessed are you, Thomas, because you believe, you've seen and you believe. But blessed are those who have not seen and still believe." Who's that? That's us. So right here in Habakkuk 2:4, the righteous will live by his faith. You ever hear that before or read it before in any other place? You'll see it in Romans chapter 1, verse 17. Paul there will quote this passage from Habakkuk. The just or the righteous will live by his faith. You see it in Galatians 3:11. You see it in Hebrews chapter 10, verse 38. This is a concept that Habakkuk brings up that's always been true, but it's so important that it's repeated throughout Scripture. Remember what Dayton said a little while ago? When God wants you to remember something, he'll keep repeating it, just like we do as parents. Dayton?
In the 5th verse, there's a statement that I think might be good for us to apply in our own environment today. Indeed, wine betrays him. And I'm saying that because in our big football stadiums recently, they've been deciding to go ahead and let them bring drink on the inside. In our wine industry, we've decided to go ahead and put it in the grocery stores. And the general trend, as we hear of Rex repeatedly often, is tied in with either drugs or drink. And our culture is moving in an acceptance of something that here betrayed them in their righteous judgment.
Right. And not just wine, but other things. Marijuana has been touted recently, and there's been a lot of controversy over making it legal. And I'm not against anything for medicinal use if it's actually used for medicine, but sometimes that's the guise under which people will get something else going on. Well, let's make it for medicine, and then we can do whatever we want with it after that. And I was reading recently about automobile accidents are on the rise in Colorado, where marijuana has been legalized, and they're attributing more and more accidents to the use of cannabis. So does it have its good points? Well, sure, it's got its good points, like a lot of the medications we take for pain. But those medications we take for pain also have to be guarded because they can become addicting.
Here that it says betrays him, which indicates I'm hooked. And
Yeah.
I don't know I'm hooked.
Yeah. Well, there's a song. Is it when you're going through hell, keep on going? Part of that song is I look for the answers in a bottle of Jim Beam or something about.
She lies to you.
Yeah, she lied to me because somehow he personified the alcohol as female, and then he said, and she lied to me, and I like the way he said it in the song. That's a great country song. We went to church this morning, and our preacher said we need to listen to country music, talk about going through hell and drinking booze. But you listen to the song and you get the message from him. He sought his answer, and this is a country music singer. He's saying, I sought the answer in alcohol, and the alcohol lied to me. That's exactly what Habakkuk is saying. This is here in verse 5. The wine betrays the haughty man. If you look at Proverbs, and I'm preaching to the choir here, I'm sure, but if anybody ever questions the validity of drink, you can take him. Now I can't find it here. Oh, verse 23, Proverbs 23. Who has woe? Who has sorrow? This is chapter 23 of Proverbs and verse 29. Sorry about that. Proverbs 23:29. Who has woe? Who has sorrow? Who has contentions? Who has complaining? Who has wounds without cause? Who has redness of eyes? Those who linger long over wine, those who go to taste mixed wine. Do not look on the wine when it's red, when it sparkles in the cup, when it goes down smoothly. What's it do at last? Bites like a serpent, stings like a viper. Anybody see that video of that guy? There's a Somebody had a camera on their door so they could see who's coming up to the door. And this guy's coming up to ring the doorbell. He's not a thief or anything. He's just coming up to ring the doorbell. And as he reaches out, you see a snake come from above and bite him right above the eye. Y'all see that video? Y'all need to be on Facebook more, see? But that made me think of that. You're totally unsuspecting of anything like that happening. It's smooth. It sparkles in the cup. It goes down so nice. Oh, yeah, and then boom, you're bit. And that's the last thing you were expecting, and that's what Solomon is saying here about alcohol. At last it bites like a serpent and stings like a viper. Your eyes will see strange things, and your mind will utter perverse things. What does tequila do according to country music?
Makes your clothes fall off.
Yeah, here we go again. Makes your clothes fall off. You see, we see the humor in it, but at the same time we see the truth. We see the truth. And even Alan Jackson, what's that story about a waitress? Wakes up the next morning, married to a waitress, and I don't even know her name. Tell me this isn't a common theme. People know this stuff, and they make songs about it. It's just so true. You'll be like one who lies down in the middle of the sea, or like one who lies down on top of a mast. They struck me, but I didn't become ill. They beat me, but I didn't know it. When shall I awake? What am I going to do? Seek another drink. Get another drink. That's just part of it. There's a lot more. Now in chapter 2, there are woes. Woe in verse 6, woe in verse 9, woe in verse 12, woe in verse 15, woe in verse 19. Plenty of woes to go around. Verse 6, it's woe to him who increases what's not his. For how long? And makes himself rich with loans? Will not your creditors rise up suddenly, and those who collect from you awaken? It's payday, and you're called to task. Woe to him in verse 9 who gets evil gain for his house to put his nest on high. He's just making a way for himself. That's all he's doing. It's just business. It's just business. Trying to get my 401 set up and my retirement and all that. It says, you've devised a shameful thing for your house by cutting off many people, so you're sinning against yourself. Surely the stone will cry out from the wall, and the rafter will answer it from the framework. Woe to him, in verse 12, who builds a city with bloodshed, founds a town with violence. It's not indeed from the Lord of hosts. Peoples toil for fire, and nations grow weary for nothing. Verse 15, woe to you who make your neighbors drink. We're back to the drink. Who mix in your venom, even to make them drunk, so as to look on their nakedness. Does that make you think of anything? Maybe not this crowd, but if you're a clubber, don't raise your hand. I don't want to know. Maybe I do want to know. But what's the danger, especially for young ladies? Somebody will buy you a drink and there'll be a drug in it. And this is exactly what happens. They drug you so they can have their way with you. And how many times have we seen this in the news? Now, we might forget it, but if you start doing a little research, you find this is in the news quite a bit. Some of it pretty high-profile cases. But this is what the Israelites were doing to one another in all kinds of different ways. Some of this is literal. Some of it's figurative. It's stand-in for the way they deceive and betray one another in all kinds of different ways. And it's interesting. He talks about violence. Verse 17, the violence unto Lebanon will overwhelm you, the devastation of its beasts by which you terrified them, because of human bloodshed and violence done to the land, to the town, and all its inhabitants. They were doing violence to one another, so God says, I'm bringing violence on you. You go back to Genesis chapter 6. Who's God talking to in Genesis 6? He's talking to Noah. And God says, I'm bringing a flood on the earth. What we usually remember is God saying, every imagination of the thoughts of their hearts are evil continually. He says that. But what he mentions twice is violence. The earth is filled with violence. And so God brings the flood. Now, is the flood violent? Oh, man. You talk about violence. A flood that would cover the earth in literally miles of sediment. That's a lot of water. That's a lot of violence. That's a lot of upheaval when the fountains of the deep are broken up. and it rains for 40 days and 40 nights. That's a lot of violence. Why did God bring the violence? On one hand, to punish those who deserved that punishment, but what else? To save the righteous from the evil. Noah and his family were not saved from the flood. They were saved from the evil of their day. That's what Peter talks about in 1 Peter chapter 3. Violence. When we perpetrate violence, God brings it back on our heads. What did God tell Noah when they got off the ark? It's like he got them all lined up there in chapter 9, and he said, all right, Noah, just him and his family. And he says, anybody who kills a man, anybody who sheds man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed. Doesn't that seem like a strange thing for God to say to Noah as soon as they get off the ark after the flood? What was he doing? He was responding to the violence that had caused the flood in the first place. And he says, this is what I want you to do. Somebody commits an act of violence against another and sheds their blood. You shed their blood. Is that revenge? It's not revenge, it's justice. I think one of the problems in our nation is that our justice system has pushed justice out of the way in favor of appeals. And I was just reading about somebody, this was a few weeks ago, but he's finally going to be executed for something he did 25 years ago. I'm thinking, really? Really? If you told your 3-year-old, I'm going to spank you in 3 days for what you did today, what would they learn from that? They wouldn't learn a thing. And by the time you got around to spanking them, they'd, what's this all about? I believe capital punishment is a good way to avoid criminals committing crime if it's fast and it's public. That's the way it was in the Old Testament. And I'm not saying we need to bring back necessarily the gallows. I don't know that I'd be against that. But I think the whole country needs to know if you kill somebody within a couple of weeks, if it's proven that you did it, you're going to die. It doesn't have to be horrible. It doesn't have to be painful, but there needs to be punishment for that kind of violence. That's what God told Noah, and that's what God's telling Habakkuk, and in a sense, that's what he's telling all of Israel, and that's what he's telling us. He's preserved this record for us today, 2,600 years later. Kirk? Exactly. That's true with elementary kids in a classroom. That's true with the whole nation. If judgment is not executed speedily, the hearts of the sons of men is fully set in them to do evil. Well, if we're not going to be punished for it, I'll just do whatever. What if you knew? What if tomorrow, hey, there aren't going to be any state troopers out on the highway. Just drive however you want. Now, some of us would say, all right, let's take a road trip. Other people would say, I ain't getting out of the house. There's got to be some control over this. The last chapter, let's not forget the last chapter. But the last chapter is prefaced with the last verse of chapter 2. Where is God according to Habakkuk in his day? The Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth be silent before him. We sing that song, don't we? The Lord is in his holy temple. Yeah, we sing that. It's a beautiful song. I love the music, but I love the words even more. Let all the earth be silent before him. Think about, and Ezekiel was a contemporary with Habakkuk. Go back to Ezekiel, and let's take a look at something Ezekiel reports in his vision, or from his vision, in chapters 9 and 10. Ezekiel chapter 9, verse 3. Then the glory of the Lord, of the God of Israel, went up from the cherub on which it had been. Where were the cherub? The cherub that were on the Ark of the Covenant, the cherub that were covering the mercy seat where the high priest would come in once a year and put the atoning blood. That's where God is saying he rose up from that place of forgiveness, from that place of mercy. He rose up. He rose up from the cherub on which it had been to the threshold of the temple. So he's at the threshold of the temple in chapter 9, verse 3. Chapter 10 and verse 4. The glory of the Lord went up from the cherub to the threshold of the temple, and the temple was filled with the cloud, and the court was filled with the brightness of the glory of God. So he's still there, but look at 10:18. Bless you. The glory of the Lord departed from the threshold of the temple and stood over the cherubim. And when the cherubim departed, they lifted their wings and rose up from the earth in my sight with the wheels beside them, and they stood still at the entrance of the east gate of the Lord's house, and the glory of the Lord of Israel hovered over them. What's Ezekiel seeing? He's seeing the tragic progression of God moving up from this place of forgiveness to the threshold of the temple, and then he's out of there. What does it signify to you in your mind's eye when you see God leave? Whoa, that's not good. That's not good. It's a scary thing to me when I think about those who've left the Lord's church, those who've gotten away from the fold. I believe that's why Jesus showed us that picture of the shepherd when there were 99 in the fold, but one leaves and goes out. What's the shepherd do? Hey, man, I got 99. We're good. Still got 99. What's he do? He leaves the 99 and he goes after that one. That ought to be our pattern, going after those, because this is them. It's as if they, well, it's not as if, it's the actual fact. We are now the temple of God. The church is the temple of God, but so are each one of us as individual Christians. And the Spirit of God lives in us. And if we leave the Lord's church, if we leave the Lord, he leaves us, and there's nothing left but judgment. That's sad. Yes?
I think this is dramatically demonstrated in the life of King Saul and in these 5 woes. Look at these 5 woes, and there's a gradual progression getting deeper and deeper away from God, and the last stage is idolatry itself.
Right.
Paganism, setting up our own gods, which is the tragedy of tragedies. And King Saul went through all of his efforts, and even trying to kill David and other things to maintain some of his honor or power, and finally went to a witch at the end, and then died.
Sadness.
And in the midst of all that, beautiful expression, the Lord sings.
Amen.
So beautiful.
The last verse. Look at the last verse of Habakkuk. In so many of the prophets, God gives us hope at the very end. Verses 18 and 19. Yet I will exult in the Lord. I will rejoice in the God of my salvation. The Lord God is my strength. He has made my feet like hinds' feet and makes me walk on my high places. If that sounds kind of self-centered, there's a reason for it, because salvation is on an individual basis. No matter what was happening in Israel, no matter what the Judeans were doing, Habakkuk knew that he was right with God, and he was giving thanks for that. Isn't it great that God will not throw us away because we're in the midst of a crooked and a perverse people? That's what Isaiah said. Woe is me, for I'm a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of a people of unclean lips. And God says, that's all right. I'm going to clean you up, and you'll be mine, and that's what he does with us. Thank you for your kind attention. We've had 2 bells. We better quit.